our walk with Christ? Has it affected our walk with Christ? And I think today, as we're talking about the view today, we can all agree that the world has some problems. We can all agree that the world might be cracking a little bit. And things aren't really going the way we hope they would, don't they? I think we can all agree that maybe there's some things that aren't right, right? Things that could be better, things that are wrong, and we'd love to correct them. And I wrote this 2 weeks ago before my vacation, but something that really hit me the other day that I know a lot of you know about, if you don't know about it, but that just struck me as wrong when I found out that Charlie Kirk had been murdered. And that just struck me as this idea that, man, there's some deeply wrong things in our world. You don't think a lot of people are feeling that today? That there's just something wrong in our world. Things are not happening the way they should. Things need to change. Things need to be different. And whether we agree or disagree on the manner in which that's done, there's a lot of things that we can agree that, man, it's different. And so as we're looking at the worldview that we're looking at today, I want to bring your attention to a line from a movie. If you've never seen this movie, I've actually never seen this movie, but this is a very famous line. It's often quoted. It's you're out of order, right? In the courtroom scene. You're out of order. This whole system's out of order. It's all out of order. Right? You're out of line. And if you know anything about this movie, which again I know very little about this movie, but I do know that the reason that this guy makes this whole statement is because he is so fed up with the corruption that he is dealing with as an attorney. He's so fed up with it in every single corner and every single place that he has to deal with that he just loses it. He has this lost it, and goes crazy, goes nuts, it's all out of it. And he's looking at a world where things are just they're not right. And there's a frustration that comes out of that. There's a frustration that doing things the way they've been done, because the ways they've always been done, right, has resulted in all these problems. Doing things the same way, just because that's the way we all know how to do it, causes a lot of frustration with people who have this worldview we're about to talk about. They have frustration with business as usual, because business as usual has caused all these things to go wrong. And I'm talking about a worldview of progressivism. And that's as you see there, this is a crowd of people who are very frustrated with the things that are going on. If you can see in there, it says no justice, no peace, right? This is a mantra that's been going around. It's a frustration at things going not the way a whole group of people see things should happen a certain way, and there's a lot of frustration that these things are coming about, and so they're clamoring for change, and that's the progressive view right there. That's the progressive view. As you can see in this notion is that business as usual, everyone's going the way that everything's going the normal way, everything's going this way, everyone's going that way. The progressive says, well, why not just change it to something different? Why not try something different? Why not try something that's completely different from everything you know, so that maybe we can get the results I'm hoping for? All right, that's essentially the boiling down of the progressive view. Okay. The progressive view sees that things need to change, and the things that really need to change are areas of social issues, social justice issues. There's a lot of issues with environmental things. Environmental things need to change because we can't go the way that the environment is going. We can't go the same way that the economy is going. All of those issues, something needs to change. And the progressive view looks at it and says, because these things are all going wrong this way, we need to change it going this way, and we're going to do it for change's sake. We're going to change it so that it's different. And a lot of that's involved in it is there's a lot of activism involved in this ideology. There's a lot of let's get out there and do some things. Let's do the thing that's required to change it. There's a lot of activity involved in the progressive movement. And the progressive movement looks at this idea of change, and things need to shift and things need to be different, because power is the thing that causes these changes to happen. So their view of all of this is the use of power needs to be corrected in order to use that power to invoke these changes. And so their view of power is get as much of it as you can, and use it all so that it can be forced into this change that we think is necessary for the things to happen. That is how the progressive views the world. It's a bid for power. The right people in charge of power will change things for the better. The wrong people in power will do things as they've always been done, will do things traditionally, will do things business as usual, and thus that is wrong because that just gets us all of the same things. All right, and so let me ask this question, right? If that's the view of the progressive, if that's the way in which progressives view the world, does the Bible in line with that? Is that the way that the Bible views the world and views power? Well, first off, I think that God would agree that something's wrong, right? God would agree that there are things wrong in this world, right? Genesis 1:31, God said he made everything and it was very good. Right? It was very good, but we get to 3:17 through 19 of Genesis, and it says, and he said to Adam, because you have listened to the voice of your wife and have eaten the tree of which I commanded you, you shall not eat of it. Cursed is the ground because of you. In pain you shall eat of it all the days of your life. Thorns and thistles it shall bring forth for you, and you shall eat the plants of the field. By the sweat of your face you shall eat bread, till you return to the ground, for out of it you were taken, for you are dust, and so dust you shall return. And that paints the nice picture that God understands that there is something wrong with the world. Right? When we look at that first picture that we looked at of the world cracking, God has a better view of this, that there is something wrong with his creation because of what Adam and Eve did, right? That there's a curse upon the way this works. And so if God understands that things are wrong, right, then wouldn't God be in favor of this idea of let's do something different to fix it? Well, if we look at Matthew 25:31 through 46, you might say yes. And the progressive actually will look to this verse to call Christians out to, you should be looking to change things. Look at Matthew 25:31 through 46. It says, when the Son of Man comes in his glory, and all the angels from him, then he will sit on his glorious throne. Before him will be gathered all the nations, and he will separate people from one another as sheep separates the sheep from the goats. And he will place the sheep on his right, but the goats on the left. Then the king will say to those on his right, come, you who are blessed by my Father, inherit the kingdom prepared for you from the foundation of the world. For I was hungry, and you gave me food. I was thirsty, and you gave me drink. I was a stranger, and you welcomed me. I was naked, and you clothed me. I was sick, and you visited me. And I was in prison, and you came to me. Excuse me. Then the righteous will answer him, saying, Lord, when did we see you hungry and feed you, or thirsty and give you drink? And when did we see you a stranger and welcome you, or naked and clothe you? And when did we see you sick or in prison and visit you? And the king will answer them, truly I say to you, as you did to one of the least of my brothers, you did it to me. Then he will say to those on his left, depart from me, you cursed, into the eternal fire prepared for the devil and his angels. For I was hungry, and you gave me no food. I was thirsty, and you gave me no drink. I was a stranger, and you did not welcome me. Naked, and you did not clothe me. Sick and in prison, and you did not visit me. Then they will also answer, saying, Lord, when did we see you hungry or thirsty or a stranger or naked or sick or in prison and did not minister to you? Then he will answer them, saying, truly I say to you, as you did not do it to one of the least of these, you did not do it to me. And these will go into eternal punishment, but the righteous into eternal life. And so again, you might say yes. You might say that, yeah, God is in agreement. Do good things for people. Do the good, do the right, and you'll be rewarded. Do the bad, do the evil, do the wrong things, you're going to be punished. And God might have this idea of you should be working towards this change, this different notion of how to treat people. And that might be right in line with this progressive notion of if you have the power to do something, you should do it for the good, and if you don't, you're going to be punished for that. And if you look also though at this idea, that the world is the creation of God has been corrupted in that. But you need to understand something as far as what God has understood and what Jesus understood about the earth. There's some things that Jesus understands that we need to kind of reconcile with. So first off, if you look at John chapter 12, verse 8, Jesus is being called out for not giving to the poor, right? Not doing something, not giving this, letting this perfume be sold and given to the poor. And this is what Jesus says in 12, verse 8. He says, "For the poor you always have with you, but you do not always have me." And if you look at the context of that and what's going on, is that, Jesus is saying this woman did something lovely for me, but he says an important truth there, right? You're always going to have the poor. Now, I want you to hear this. As the progressive would say that we should be able to do everything we can to end poverty, right? The billionaires should give all their money so that poverty be gone. We should all be giving up all these things so that the poor aren't suffering anymore. There's this idea and notion that somehow these problems are solvable, and Jesus said something to the effect that, no, you're always going to have poor people. It's always going to be the case. It's an interesting thought. Look with me into Romans chapter 13, verse 7, because it's 1 through 7. Because here Paul says another thing that I think is important that we need to understand the truth of when we come to this idea. It says, "Let every person be subject to the governing authorities, for there is no authority except from God, and those who exist have been instituted by God. Therefore, whoever resists the authority resists what God has appointed. And those who resist will incur judgment, for rulers are not a terror to good conduct, but to bad. Would you have no fear of the one who is in authority? Then do what is good, and you will receive his approval. For he is God's servant for your good. But if you do wrong, be afraid, for he does not bear the sword in vain. For he is the servant of God, an avenger who carries out God's wrath on the wrongdoer. Therefore, one must be in subjection, not only to avoid God's wrath, but also for the sake of his conscience. For because of this, you also pay taxes, for the authorities are ministers of God, attending to this very thing. Pay to all what is owed to them, taxes to whom taxes are owed, revenue to whom revenue is owed, respect to whom respect is owed, honor to whom honor is owed." And where the progressive would say, well, we need to subvert authority that is not going after this new thing, right? If the authority is not serving this notion that things need to change, that we need to shift things, that we need to do things differently because we're getting bad results, right? Paul's just outlined here that no, the authority is there for a reason. And the authority is there for a reason, and we are required to submit to that authority. We're required to live under that authority as they have called us to live out. Even when you don't like the results, even when you don't like what your taxes go to, you still have to pay taxes. What a bummer. Okay, all right. Now, even when you don't like the person who is in charge and in the seats doing the power and doing those things, right, you still have to go by the laws that they instill, right? You still have to go by the things that they say because God put them there. Man, the progressive has a really hard time with this idea, right? We should get rid of those governments. We should get rid of those people who are doing things wrong, and we should impose new things and new different ideas and new different laws. And thankfully, we have a country that allows us to be flexible in this, but that doesn't mean that we don't have to adhere to laws that are thus passed down. And so then let's ask the question. So when the progressive comes in with this idea that things need to change, this is the thing that really bothers me the most, okay, is when the progressive mindset comes in and says Jesus said something to the effect of this. That if you can read that hey, let's go out and change the world. This was from a series they did a while back about Jesus, and Jesus calls his disciples, and we're going to go change the world. And that's what the progressive has this idea of. And I'm here to tell you is that Jesus never said that. Okay? Jesus never said, let's go change the world. Jesus called his disciples to live in the world as the world is. Okay? Live in the world as the world is, and yet still live to the standard that I call you to. All right? And so that's the idea on the progressive side of things, of how they get this so fundamentally flawed. And where Christ comes in and says, no. There's some things that are realities of this world. There are things that are right in this world. They're the way they are, and we're going to function in spite of those things. We're going to function in a different way from those things. We're calling the world away from worldliness, but we're not going to change the way the world functions. Does that make sense? And so with that, the reason why this is such a problem is because there is such thing as the progressive Christian. If you've heard of this, this is a term that is definitely flashed around in Christianity. Some call this a good thing. Some would say, yeah, we're progressive Christians. We're Christians that understand the modern world in which we live in. We're Christians that are imposing, that we're challenging the Bible with the culture and the culture with the Bible, and we're putting these things together so that we have a modern sense of what Christianity is supposed to be like. And the problem with that, the problem with the modern Christian, the progressive Christian, is that we have this idea of not taking the Bible seriously. And that's really the problem with the progressive Christian. The progressive Christian will throw out the authority of Scripture to make way for the cultural problems that need shifting. The progressive Christian will focus on the love and the commands of Jesus as being in being joy, love one another, accept, but they'll bring in accept one another, bring it all together so that we can all kind of sing kumbaya on that. And the structure of the church that God gave, the structure of His Word, the authority is all cast out if it doesn't serve a new progressive idea, a new way in which we can maybe take Jesus' ideas and take Jesus' whole structure, and maybe we can iron out some of the kinks so that we can get a better result, right? So we can get some sort of better, more modern result. And that's a problem, right? That's a problem when we look at Jesus' words and say, you know what? We can change those things so that we can accommodate a more modern thought, right? Because that's literally what the progressive is shooting for. And the progressive is shooting for this thing. It's shooting for this idea that let's change this thing and let's change all of these things, because the progressive has a problem at its core base of what power is for. All right? So if you've been looking at what I've been saying and you hear what I'm saying, is that the idea here is that the progressive who wants to change things, who wants to use power to impart their will, to enact something different, they have a fundamental problem with how power is supposed to be used, who wields that power, and what that power is for. God tells us some things about power that are pretty different than the dynamic that we're given by the progressive. If you look with me at John 18:36. John 18:36. Jesus is in chains. He is being tried. He is being questioned. He is on his way to the cross. And when he's asked about who he is, Jesus says this in verse 36. Jesus answered, "My kingdom is not of this world. If my kingdom were of this world, my servants would have been fighting that I might not be delivered over to the Jews. But my kingdom is not of this world." And so we need to recognize the reality of the kingdom in which Jesus is ruler, is head. All right? His kingdom does not go by the rules of power as we see on earth. It does not function and form the way all the kingdoms up until now have functioned. It doesn't function under the rule that okay, we've got someone at the top and they're doing all these things and they're just laying it down to the rest of the world. You need to follow my orders and you need to do as I say because I said so. That is not the form and function of Christ's power on earth, of Christ's kingdom. If you'll look with me further, we're going to look at 2 Corinthians chapter 5, 18 through 21. This is what it says. It says, "All this is from God, who through Christ reconciled us to himself and gave us the ministry of reconciliation." That is, in Christ, God was reconciling the world to himself, not counting their trespasses against them, and entrusting to us the message of reconciliation. That is, in Christ, God was reconciling the world to himself, not counting their trespasses against them. I think I wrote that down twice, my apologies. And entrusting us to the message of reconciliation. Therefore, we are ambassadors for Christ, God making his appeal through us. We implore you on behalf of Christ, be reconciled to God. For our sake he made him to be sin who knew no sin, so that in him we might become the righteousness of God. All right, so the idea here is that Christ's power on earth, if Christ's kingdom was of this earth, he would have had disciples who fought for him. He would have had disciples who broke him free. He would not have been delivered over to the Jews. He'd be reigning. He'd probably even be reigning now if he were on earth, if he were still, because Jesus probably could have raised himself from the dead if anything had happened, right? All of those things. Jesus could have been reigning on earth. But Jesus used his power for a different purpose. Jesus' power was for him to sacrifice himself so that you and I might actually attain a reconciliation unattainable by anything else. That power was offered up, the power of his life was offered up so that we might have reconciliation. And if we have reconciliation, that we might present reconciliation to everyone else. That's the purpose of his power. And then further, if we look at the power that we are given the gospel, in that gospel it says this in Romans 1:16 through 17. For I am not ashamed of the gospel, for it is the power of God for salvation to everyone who believes, to the Jew first and also to the Greek. For in it the righteousness of God is revealed from faith for faith, as it is written, the righteous shall live by faith. And so this is the power